Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Winter is at Lethbridge with a vengeance, and city officials were out making sure locals were moving their vehicles for the snowplows on snow routes. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith says a top priority for our government in 2024 is to cut down on emergency wait times. And the Taliban in Afghanistan wants to arm itself with nuclear weapons from North Korea. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A Lethbridge Christian organization is breathing a huge sigh of relief today. Up until late Friday, a stop order was hanging over the operations of Streets Alive mission. It was implemented by the City of Lethbridge in November following a complaint by the downtown BRZ. The complaint accused Streets Alive of carrying out some of their services without proper permits. Now, the city investigated and put a stop order in place until Streets Alive applied for at least 3 separate land use permits. But on January 5th, the Development and Appeal Board decided to revoke the stop order. The board says it came to its decision after reviewing an appeal made by Streets Alive, along with presentations at a December 21st hearing. After reviewing and weighing the evidence, the board found Streets Alive's current operation does in fact have the proper permits and allowed their appeal to stand while revoking the stop order. Now, the co-founder of Streets Alive, Ken Kissick, says he's happy with the result.
I just want to thank the community as a whole for their support and the support that they offer to us to help this group of people, understanding this is a difficult group of people that has some very negative behaviors that people can struggle with. But I'm grateful to live in Lethbridge, to see democracy in action and to be part of a solution.
Kissick also says he believes the Development Authority had erred in its interpretation of the land use definition of religious assembly. It includes worship and social activities, which is what Streets Alive mission offers its clients. Well, the welcome moisture in the form of snowfall here in Lethbridge caused the first snow route activation of the season. Plows were out early Monday morning to tackle the more than 80 kilometers of snow routes throughout the city. Transportation Operations Manager Julianne Ruck says the late arrival of snow allowed the city to do a big advertising campaign to make residents aware of snow routes and plowing.
Everybody received the postcards. We have a web page up. People can provide feedback or get information from 311. And we also heavily advertise the Loop app as a tool to stay informed on when we declare the snow roads. Additionally, we also have an AVL tracker where residents can watch where our plows are and if snow roads are active or not. We change the color of the snow roads when they are active. Right now they show as blue, light blue, and that means they are active and we come into your neighborhood and plow.
Once the snow routes are activated, the City of Lethbridge is asking that people move their vehicles out of the way as they can be quite an obstacle for the snowplows.
Parked vehicles are very hard for our plows to maneuver around. We don't want to damage people's cars, so we have to kind of be very diligent, slow down, and it really slows down our overall operation. One reason to have the snow routes in place is to ask people to remove their cars so that we can operate more efficiently.
Well, you know, it is winter. I guess we should expect this kind of weather here with some of the snow. Good to see our city crews out clearing a lot of the snow and ice from our busy streets here in the city. Jeanette Roche is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, we saw a few centimeters of the white stuff on Sunday, and more is on its way this week?
Yes, Hal, more is on the way, but so is more cold weather. But before we get to that, let's stay a little bit positive here. We were actually, if you can believe it or not, Lethbridge was the hot spot in the province today. We actually exceeded our expected high of -4. We got up to about -2. And staying on the positive, we could expect some positive digits as well, as we're looking at a high of 2 degrees on Tuesday. Now, getting back to the white stuff, we are expected a 30% chance of flurries both this evening and into Tuesday before we see much more snow later on in the week, as well as a dive into the deep freeze. So I'll be back later in the show to tell you all about that deep freeze coming at us. Hal?
Make sure we bundle up. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Heavy snow is falling, creating blizzard-like conditions on a number of highways in British Columbia. The Coquihalla from Hope to Kamloops, Highway 3 between Hope and Princeton, and the OK Connector will all have severe winter driving conditions right now. The folks at Drive BC are not recommending travel on those highways. Environment Canada is calling for up to 50 centimeters of snow and 80-kilometer-an-hour winds that may reduce visibility to zero on some of the routes. Snowfall warnings remain up for much of BC's south coast, Vancouver Island, and the southern interior. The Manitoba government is promising $12 million to improve a highway intersection where a crash between a minibus and a semi-trailer last year killed 17 people. An outside review of the intersection of Highways 1 and 5 says one safety risk at the intersection is a narrow median, which can make it very difficult for drivers making left-hand turns or going straight through. The report outlines 3 potential changes: widening the median, turning the intersection into a roundabout, or restricting left turns in some directions. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says a top priority for her government this year is to reduce the amount of time patients have to wait in hospital emergency rooms. She says wait times did come down last year, but they need to improve even more.
We reduced it by 17%, but it's still too long. We had been making great progress as well, reducing the waiting list by about 3,000 patients per month by doing more surgeries. I would like us to get to a point where we have no one waiting longer than medically recommended. That's where we should be. That's what the promise that we should have. And every single Alberta family should have access to a family practitioner. If we are able to make some serious strides towards that in 2024, then I'll feel like we're on the right track. If we don't make as much progress as we want to, we'll troubleshoot and we'll make adjustments along the way. But everything is geared towards improving the patient experience and making people feel excited to come to work again.
A Montreal man who is being charged with killing 2 men on New Year's Day with his car, then driving off, remains in custody. 23-year-old Antoine Duboc appeared briefly at a Montreal courtroom on Monday, where his case was postponed until February 14th. He's facing 6 charges, including dangerous driving causing death, impaired driving, and fleeing the scene of a deadly collision. The victims have been identified as 30-year-old Agustin Katimba and 31-year-old Michael Chintakis. Police say the accused allegedly struck the 2 pedestrians at high speed shortly after 1 in the morning before fleeing the scene, first in his vehicle and then on foot. Members of Parliament must set a better tone when the House of Commons resumes at the end of this month. Now, that's according to an interim Liberal House leader, Stephen McKinnon, who was sworn in on Monday. He's temporarily replacing Karina Gould while she's on maternity leave. The Liberal MP from Gatineau, Quebec, is now in charge of negotiating with other parties to shepherd legislation through the lower chamber. He says his party is steadfast in helping Canadians.
We've had, just before Christmas, I talked about the 30-hour vote marathon. We passed landmark gun legislation. We moved ahead with the GST cut on rental units and the major competition reforms with respect to groceries for Canadians. And we remain laser focused on those issues that help assist Canadians with affordability challenges, that help assist Canadians with getting more affordable and more accessible housing. And we'll have a lot more to say about all of that as the session unfolds. As for specific pieces of legislation, I'll let the ministers obviously speak to those, but we'll continue moving forward with the agenda that we've laid out.
The short-term cabinet adjustment comes as personal heckling has increased in the House of Commons. McKinnon said it was testy last fall in the House and is pledging an open-door policy toward finding common ground with opposition parties. A U.S. federal aviation official says the Boeing jetliner that suffered an in-flight blowout over Oregon may have suffered a pressurization problem that actually impacted a few flights. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt.
They documented the entire flight deck, and they asked about the auto pressurization fail light that did illuminate in 3 previous flights, one on December 7th, one on January 3rd, and one on January 4th. In these 3 previous flights, after the light illuminated, they flipped the switch to alt mode, which is normal. There's a backup. It was very benign. Nothing occurred, very benign. The light illuminated. They flipped it, they reported it, it was tested by maintenance and then reset. There was a decision by Alaska Airlines to a restriction, actually, they put in place. They call it an ETOPS restriction that prevented that plane from being flown to Hawaii over water.
Officials with Alaska Airlines say they have grounded all Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes following the window and fuselage blowing out on one of its jets shortly after takeoff. A display featuring the shoes of those hostages who have not yet been released by Hamas has been set up in Israel. Families of many of the hostages are continuing to rally for their release from the terrorist organization.
I felt that the public is forgetting the hostages. I felt the government and the world stop doing any actions to bring them home. And I have this very distress feeling.
Israel says it will continue the war that has now allegedly killed 23,000 Palestinians in Gaza until Hamas is completely wiped out. You know, as the war between Israel and Hamas continues, a former terrorist who was a sniper for the Palestinian Liberation Organization has spoken out against terrorist acts by extremist groups. Taz Sada is sharing how he walked away from the PLO after he gave his life to Christ. He came to know the Lord after going to the United States to upgrade his education. He cracked open and read the Bible following the suggestion of his new Christian friend Charlie. He shared the details on TBN's The Rosenberg Report.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
John 1.
I started shaking. I lost conscience.
After one verse?
After that verse, yes. And the next I know, I'm on my knees with my hands lifted up, inviting Jesus to be my Lord and Savior. Charlie sitting, shaking, crying. What happened, Charlie? He said, man, never seen anything like this in my life. You looked weird, but I like it anyway. And he came and he hugged me.
Oh, incredible. Sada says once the war between Israel and Hamas is over, he would like to return to Gaza and tell those who may become radicalized to take the same steps he did in becoming a believer. The persecution against Christians is expected to increase in 2024 in a number of countries, including India, Pakistan, and China. That's according to the UK-based Release International. The group says hostility is also rising in Nigeria with the threat of more attacks by the Muslim extremist group Boko Haram. The charity's Andrew Boyd has more now in this report.
As India heads towards elections in 2024, violence towards Christians is growing. Partners of Release International say persecution has increased under the Hindu nationalist government. And if the ruling BJP is given a fresh mandate in 2024, they fear persecution will rise again. They warn the persecution of Christians and other religious minorities increases dramatically with each passing month. Another key country of concern in the new persecution trends report is Pakistan. In August, a mob destroyed 23 churches and set fire to 80 houses in Jaramwala, fueled by false accusations of blasphemy against the Christian minority. There have since been many copycat claims of blasphemy. For Nigerians, this year looks set to be another year of suffering for Christians, as complacency by the authorities emboldens Islamist terror groups who are attacking Christian communities. RI's Nigeria partner reports the killing of small groups of individuals is spreading across the central regions. Last year alone, they say more than 6,000 people were killed by Islamist terrorists and radicalized Fulani militia. Release International is training Nigerian pastors who are conducting evangelism at great risk to themselves in regions controlled by Boko Haram. Persecution is deepening in China, where Christians faced increased surveillance and harassment from the authorities. Release International partners say the ultimate aim is to eliminate Christianity altogether. Other countries of concern include Afghanistan, where RI's partners say the fear of persecution is increasing. In Eritrea, the number of Christian prisoners of faith doubled in the past year to around 500. Christianity is spreading in Iran, where RI partners say the aim of the authorities is to exterminate the Persian-speaking church. In North Korea, Christianity received an unexpected boost from COVID. During lockdown, where searches were suspended, people were able to listen to Christian broadcasts and download Bibles. Release International has launched an appeal to help Christians facing oppression in India and other countries. Details are available on the Release International website. This is Andrew Boyd for the Global News Alliance.
Well, we have a blanket of white here in Lethbridge, and that blanket may be looking even thicker later this week. A complete look at the forecast, including the long-range outlook, is coming up. You know, many of our farmers here in southwestern Alberta should be happy with some of the moisture we've been receiving. The snow is a welcome sight. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, many in our agricultural community should be even happier as the week progresses, as we're expecting even more of the white stuff.
Yeah, we are, Hal, along with some frigid temperatures. We're looking at periods of snow, chances of flurries almost all week long. Looking into tonight and tomorrow, we are seeing a 30% chance of flurries. Into Wednesday, we're seeing periods of snow as well on Friday. Saturday, actually Friday looks like the only sunny spot there, and then back to snow on Saturday. But look at these temperatures as they drop. So like I was mentioning before, tomorrow's the bright spot in the week. We're seeing the plus temperature there, and then we're just going to dive right into that deep freeze beginning on Wednesday, minus 17 for a high, an expected high of minus 26 on Thursday. Well, you thought that was cold. Wait till you see Friday's temperature, even though it's sunny. Minus 29 is the high, back to minus 26 on Saturday and minus 20 on a Sunday to round out that 7-day forecast. I don't know about you, but yeah, winter's definitely here. I'm not looking forward to it. Average high for this time of year, minus 2. Average low, minus 14. We're going to be plunging way below that. 13 was our high temperature that happened back in 1943. And on this day, back in 1989, we saw our chilliest on this day, which was a record minus 38 degrees. Sun rose this morning at 8:27. Sunset this evening at 4:50. We're looking at 8 hours, 23 minutes of daylight. That's another bright spot, I guess, is the fact that the days are getting longer again. Okay, there's a whole lot of alerts and warnings happening across the country. In Victoria, we're looking at a wind warning. We're looking at 70 to 90 winds happening near the water. Also, elevated ocean levels are expected to be accompanied by significant waves. Those are all expected. Also, a 40% chance of showers, 9 degrees for a high there, 8 for an expected high in Vancouver. Vancouver looking at a risk of thunderstorm early in the morning, 5 millimeters of rain, and up to 80 winds near the water. Also, 2 highway alerts in the BC area. The Coquihalla and the Sea to Sky highways are expecting hazardous winter driving conditions with heavy snowfall. Okay, moving on to Edmonton, high of minus 13, looking at a 30% chance of flurries, and then 5 to 10 centimeters of snow. In Calgary, mainly cloudy skies with a high of 0 degrees, and looking at 20 winds. As we get more into the rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon expecting a snowfall warning. Snow and blowing snow is expected to begin near noon tomorrow, looking at 2 to 4 centimeters of snow, minus 15 for an expected high in Regina, expecting a high of minus 9. Mainly sunny skies, rather. We're looking at increased clouds. And then the snow will begin. Wind chill, also looking at a risk of frostbite in the morning. As we're looking to Winnipeg, sun and cloud, we're looking at frostbite also in the morning with that wind chill and 20 kilometer per hour wind. As we get to the central part of the country, Toronto looking at a high of 2 degrees. We're looking at snow, which can be changing to rain or snow by the afternoon, 5 to 10 centimeters of snow with a 10 to 15 millimeter rainfall expected, 30 to 50 winds. Minus 4 for an expected high in Ottawa, 2 to 4 centimeters. Then a winter storm warning is expected late Tuesday into Wednesday. They're looking at freezing rain and ice pellets with 10 to 15 centimeters of snow. As we look to Montreal, minus 2 for an expected high, 2 centimeters of snow is expected in the afternoon there. As we look to Atlantic Canada, okay, here we're seeing some basically decent conditions. Looking at sunshine in Fredericton, high of minus 6, minus 3 for a high in Halifax. Looking at clearing skies, but 20 to 40 winds. Minus 5 for a high in Charlottetown, looking at 60% chance of flurries. And we get over to St. John's, high of minus 5, looking at 40% flurries, 30 to 50 winds. But here's what's happening also. Storm surge warning in effect. We're looking at 4 to 6 meter waves. With maximum water levels that could be pushing water onto vulnerable sections of the coastline. So there you have it. Lots of weather happening across the country. There you go.
The Insurance Bureau of Canada says severe weather and natural disasters caused more than $3 billion in insured damages last year. That puts 2023 on its list of most expensive weather years. It was only topped by 2016 in the wildfire in Fort McMurray, Alberta, which caused close to $6 billion in damage. The wildfires in BC's Okanagan and Shuswap areas caused about $720 million in damage. Severe summer storms in Ontario caused about $340 million in damage, and summer hailstorms in Calgary and Winnipeg combined to cause more than $250 million in damage. The union representing 2,100 flight attendants at Air Transat say they've reached a new deal. The flight attendants with the Canadian Union of Public Employees rejected an agreement that was reached earlier last month. The contract for Air Transat's flight attendants based at airports in Toronto and Montreal expired at the end of October of 2022. Details of the tentative new agreement were not yet made available. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 137 points on the day to finish at 21,074. The Dow was up 216 points to 37,683. The S&P 500 was up 66 on the day to 4763, and the Nasdaq was up 319 points to 14,483. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $2.87 on the day to $70.94 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to $2.95 US. Gold was down $17.38 to $2,028.07 US an ounce, and silver was down 8 cents to $23.11 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.93 per bushel, barley's at $6.68, canola's at $13.45, and corn is at $7.75 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was down 63 cents to $169.95. Feeder cattle were up 75 cents to $223.88, and lean hogs February contract was up 60 cents to $70.60. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.92 US. Recapping one of our top stories. Not only did we receive our fair share of snow here in southwestern Alberta, but many regions of BC have also been hit by some blizzards. Heavy snow is falling in a number of highways in British Columbia, creating very dangerous driving conditions. The Coquihalla from Hope to Kamloops, Highway 3 between Hope and Princeton, and the OK connector of the Coquihalla have all had severe winter driving conditions. The folks at Drive BC are not recommending travel on those highways right now. Environment Canada is calling for up to 50 centimeters of snow and 80 kilometer-an-hour winds that may reduce visibility to near zero on some of those routes. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari from the Foreign Desk, says the Taliban in Afghanistan is becoming more of a threat as it tries to secure nuclear weapons from North Korea. She'll have details for us shortly, and she'll also have the latest on the war in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of our local stories, pop by our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Warm your hearts this season and come enjoy the Winter Light Festival at the Nikayuko Japanese Garden until February 24th. In the month of January, every Thursday to Saturday from 5 to 9 p.m., experience the illumination of over 170,000 lights decorating the beautifully shaped trees and gardens. Ticket prices and various packages are available online at nikayuko.com. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. and Thursdays at Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
As the war between Israel and Hamas continues in Gaza, comes word that the Yemen-based Houthis are also launching attacks against the Jewish state. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, some are quite concerned that the Biden administration is emboldening Iran and their proxies, including the Houthis.
Yeah, and the Houthis are not just targeting Israel, but they're also targeting the United States. The United States and the Biden administration wants us to believe these are two separate narratives. So since October 7th, of course, we've been watching the war unfold as Hamas attacked Israel brutally. The hostages are still there in Gaza, et cetera. Since that day, there have been over 100 attacks by Iran's proxies against U.S. assets in the region. We're talking about Iraq, Syria, and of course the Houthis in Yemen, which you mentioned. We're talking about deterrence, not something that we can do today, but something that should have been done from the beginning of the Biden administration to give the message to Iran's regime that this is not something that the United States will, in fact, accept. Now, it's very difficult to tell the same Iran regime that has been begged for a nuclear deal, that has been given concessions, that has been given billions of dollars. Sanctions have been removed from the regime. And now, it's very difficult for the United States to rein that all in and say, you know what, enough is enough. You have to stop these. So, of course, the Biden administration not wanting this to escalate, and I don't blame them. They don't want the United States to get involved in another war. But at the same time, it seems like these one-off responses to these provocations are not sending a clear message to Tehran that the United States means business. And of course, micromanaging Israel's war from the White House is not something that has gone well in certain ways. Let Israel finish the job, Hamas, or back down. Or, you watch John Kirby at the podium with these reporters in his press briefings, and it's a difficult job because you have reporters who do not understand, have not been, the situation has not properly been explained to them, and all they look at is the death toll not being proportional. And so here we are, but the proxies continue to fire down on U.S. assets, and of course, as we know, the war between Hamas and Israel continues. Several ceasefire deals have been presented by the mediators, and Hamas continues to say no. So here we are.
Lisa, the Palestinian Health Authority, which is run by Hamas, says that more than 20,000 Palestinians have died so far in Gaza. Now, we see a lot of the death and destruction there. But how can we really believe the health authority since it's run by Hamas when they talk about 20,000? They say mostly women and children.
Right, and there's different numbers floating around, 20,000. I saw somewhere 30,000. I mean, the number keeps going up, and then of course, there has been death and destruction. Of course, there have been young children who have died, and I know that's not something that anyone wants to deny. It's not something anyone wants to see. Everyone wants to see an end to this war. But when you see, for example, people ask me about the Al Jazeera reporters that have been killed in the midst of this war, and said, how is Israel targeting reporters? Well, sure enough, this morning, the Times of Israel had the story about how these journalists, the specific ones that we're talking about, were embedded with terrorists, and that's how they were killed, because they were right there. It just there's an answer for everything. The reason why the death toll is so high is because Hamas, who again is the leadership for the Palestinian people, we look at them as ISIS, we look at them like any other terror organization, but they are the leaders. They're the ones, as you said, that run the health ministry. They're the ones who are reporting and giving facts out to the New York Times and CNN and everyone else who's believing them. That's the issue that we have here. And again, this is a war. There's death, there's destruction, there's a death toll. But how can we actually vet? How can we confirm these numbers? How can we verify anything? We can't. The only thing that we can reiterate and hope for, and I know that President Biden has tried to do this, is to press Hamas to get the civilians out of harm's way. Israel has given them an opportunity, even though it upsets their strategy, right? What group or what sovereign nation wants to go to their enemy and say, hello, we're coming, get out of the way? But they feel that they have to, because there's so many Palestinians being used as human shields. They're hiding in hospitals and schools and mosques and places that are off limits in any other given situation. But for Hamas, it's collateral, and they put them in the way, and this is what we're dealing with. So nobody wants to see that number go up. Nobody wants to see Palestinian children or Israeli children die. These are senseless deaths, and we hope that it stops very soon, and we hope those hostages come home, and we hope for a ceasefire. We hope for all of that. But really, the terrorists are calling the shots here, and that's very unfortunate.
Israel Defense Forces recently discovered that Hamas was creating precision-guided missiles and other strategic weapons with the assistance of Iran.
Right. So, this is crazy how I get asked these questions on a daily basis, whether it's in formal interviews like this one or even on Twitter, where people are like, how can you really be sure that Iran is involved? Well, here you go. We know we have evidence. There has been reporting, extensive, with detail, reporting about how Iran has been involved in the planning, in the actual choosing the date of the October 7th attack, in funding, along with Qatar and other terror helpers, and also in getting weaponry and building weaponry. We know for a fact that Iran's regime is pulling the puppet strings behind this attack. We also know that they're providing weapons and very advanced weapons to both Hamas and Hezbollah, by the way. And that is the fear that if Hezbollah gets involved, they're going to be using weapons that the Iron Dome perhaps cannot handle, or Israel cannot as easily handle two fronts that have become much more sophisticated than Israel anticipated, or perhaps the global community had calculated, in the sense that Iran's regime has really upped the game for these terror organizations. They're not just, these terror rats in a hole. They have now built sophisticated tunnel systems. They have sophisticated weaponry. And of course, with Iran's regime helping them with the billions of dollars that they have pouring into terror, this is not a child's game in terms of the sophistication of the strategy of all of it.
There are also reports right now, Lisa, that Lebanon-based Hezbollah is threatening Israel with fighting without limits. And those words were documented by the Middle East Media Research Institute.
Right, and we've heard this many times from Hezbollah and from Iran's regime, warning Israel to back down, to scale down their war against Hamas in Gaza, with threats that if Hezbollah in southern Lebanon gets involved, then, as you said, no limits, meaning anything goes. They will destroy and take Israel off the map, which has always been their threat. I want to remind people, when this regime, Iran's regime, came into power, toppling the Shah now almost 45 years ago, their main focus was on two enemies: the big Satan, which was the United States, and the small Satan, which was Israel, right there in the region within arm's reach. And they have done everything to rally people around the flag, which really has not worked, because after 45 years, we saw all those protesters on the streets really calling out Iran's regime, knowing that they have put all their money and the people's money into terrorism. And that hasn't stopped. The only people we really have to convince is the mainstream media, the people in the West, leaders in the West, in Europe, the United States, and Canada, that these are the bad guys. And they do not do good, not for their people, not for the people of the world, not for national security, not for global security. And that's where we are. Iran's regime is the head of the dragon. They are the ones who are funding Hezbollah, funding Hamas, funding suicide bombers, supporting the Houthis in Yemen, supporting insurgencies in Syria and Iraq. And enough is enough. I mean, people are dying, losing their lives senselessly for what?
Now, Iran has arrested 11 people as the death toll has risen to 91 in connection with twin suicide bombings in the southeastern city of Kerman last week, Lisa.
Yeah, this is an interesting story, Helen. I think a lot of people are getting it wrong, so I thank you for bringing it up. This was a memorial service at the grave site of Qasem Soleimani. If you remember, Qasem Soleimani was a Quds leader for the Revolutionary Guard. He was one of the masterminds of pulling all the different strings in the Middle East for Iran's proxies. He was taken out by the Trump administration in a drone strike, January of 2020. So this was at his memorial in Kerman. It was very, very mysterious because no one from the government was there, and they call him a hero. They call him a martyr. They call him all sorts of things. So if he was so iconic, why wasn't anyone from the government there? No one was there from his immediate family. These were all supporters that gathered there. After the bombing, many in the government were quick to blame Israel. Many pundits here in the West, very quick to blame Israel. Very shortly thereafter, ISIS quickly takes credit. Now, the two things I want to bring people's attention to is, A, ISIS is very quick to take credit for terror plots that they did not participate in, merely because they think it's up for grabs and they can get some street credit. Secondly, Iran's regime is very quick to throw down false flags for many reasons: to distract the world from other stories that are going on, to rally these lower religious socioeconomic brackets around the flag, which they did in the Iran-Iraq War. They would do it again here to say, oh, we need our constituencies back. Because if you remember, how when we had those freedom protests in Iran, there have been protests in clerical cities as well. So they're losing that constituency. Maybe they want to bring them back. But this all goes to say, we're still not sure who committed these bombs. That death toll continues to rise. These people went to the memorial and, of course, lost their lives in this suicide bombing. ISIS taking credit. Iran's regime, we're not sure who was involved. We're not sure why would they want to distract, but we know that there's much more to the story.
A ramming attack at an East Jerusalem checkpoint killed a 4-year-old Palestinian girl, Lisa, and wounded a woman on Sunday. Also over the weekend, an East Jerusalem driver was shot and killed hours after a roadside bomb killed a border police officer, a female police officer, and injured 3 others.
Yeah, this is, the growing front of this war. It's going beyond, obviously, Gaza. We're talking about West Bank now. It's just rogue, right? These are car rammings. These are do-it-yourself. These are one-offs. These aren't necessarily Hamas fighters. Maybe they are. They could be just, radicalized Palestinians who are taking matters into their own hands. And as you said, a child was killed. A Palestinian child was killed. Collateral damage. Why are children in these places? Why are they growing up with all of this? I don't know if you saw how this went viral. It was a puzzle that was found in one of the homes in Gaza, and it was a children's puzzle, and it was all about, with guns and bombs and killing Israelis and bloodied flags. I mean, why are children growing up with this? Why do they have to witness this? Why do they have to really have this experience growing up rather than just having a normal childhood? And that's really the question. I mean, we've always said the Palestinian people deserve more. We keep saying they deserve more, but when they're growing up with terrorism from a young age, they're growing up as radicalized. They're growing up to hate, and then there's nothing you can do after a certain point. So this is something that really the UN has to address, the West has to address, and really get to the root of it.
We have to send the kids more Barbies and little Hot Wheels, stuff that we grew up with playing. Now, Lisa, there are reports from Reuters that Iraq's prime minister has threatened to oust all forces assigned to a U.S.-led coalition to defeat the Islamic State in the country. This follows a U.S. airstrike on a terrorist militia leader in Baghdad.
Yeah, this has probably more to do with the U.S. strike on the militia leader in Iraq. And the reason for that is Iran's proxies are operating in Iraq. Now, the unfortunate thing is when the U.S. withdrew most of their presence from Iraq, we handed Iraq over on a silver platter to Iran's regime and their proxies. They then had to get along with the local government there. And they did. And now you have insurgencies that are not just insurgencies there, but they are very well in bed with Iraq's government. And that is why they were very upset about the U.S. strike in Iraq, and now are threatening to remove the presence that we have over there. It's a small presence, but it's important to keep some sort of representation in Iraq, in Syria, and not have what we're having right now. But anyway, Iran's proxies, have obviously this monopoly over all these countries. They have worked on having a presence there. They have worked on these relationships, and this is very much indicative of that growing relationship.
Here's a scary story. The Taliban in Afghanistan, Lisa, who took over control of the country when the U.S. withdrew its military personnel, are now reportedly seeking access to nuclear weapons. And there are talks with North Korea to do so?
Absolutely. This is a scary story. Not only the fact that the Taliban want nuclear weapons, the fact that the Taliban's, it's almost like when we talk about Hamas ruling Gaza, another terror organization, the Taliban ruling Afghanistan, another country we served up on a silver platter to the terrorists. Now they are after nuclear weapons. But not just that, the fact that these rogue nations, they're finding these strange bedfellows and really collaborating and helping each other out. Talk about Iran selling weapons to Russia. Talk about the Taliban going over to North Korea. Talk about China and Iran, selling oil to China and making trade deals. Talk about China brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I mean, the list goes on. And this happened only within the last 3 years of the Biden administration. But I know that our enemies are watching. They know that they can play out the clock, and they have another year to do whatever they need to do before we have our elections here and we get a new president here in the United States, hopefully a new one. But what we shall see. And, it really speaks to a weak foreign policy where these rogue nations can just go marching, in and helping each other out and really teaching each other the tricks of the trade to outmaneuver the West. And it's not too difficult to outmaneuver a very weak Washington, D.C., and that's what we're watching.
She's a foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles. Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, ever since the Sound of Freedom movie came out, more and more people are becoming aware of the horrible reality of human trafficking. Today's guest is part of an organization that is trying to do their part to put a stop to it. Paul LaBelle joins us from Lethbridge. He is the acting president for the Alberta chapter of Bikers Against Trafficking. Welcome to Bridge City News, Paul. So great to have you on today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you.
First of all, tell us what the Bikers Against Trafficking organization is and maybe how it began.
Sure. Well, we're not an MC, a motorcycle club, or an RC, riding club. We're an organization. We're simply everyday people who share their love of riding motorcycles and have answered the call for a higher purpose. So we are the Canadian division of an organization that is headquartered in Lake Mary, Florida. We're a small group of approximately 30 members based in southern Alberta and southern BC, a team of dedicated men and women who volunteer their time and finances to help break the chains of human trafficking. We do this through education and bringing awareness to everyday people, spreading the word that sexual exploitation and modern-day slavery is not acceptable in our communities, our province, and of course, our nation. We hope to expand further into other parts of Canada as our membership grows. So each member, just so you know, each member they have to undergo a criminal background check as well as a vulnerability sector screening. And this is necessary to ensure that our members or prospective members don't have a criminal history of sexual offenses. And we provide a training video as well that was created for each member that must take it, which outlines our mission, our goals, and our biker code. Our mission is to defend those who cannot defend themselves and help eradicate human trafficking one person at a time. It's really quite amazing how many people have no knowledge of human trafficking or no idea how bad this heinous crime has become.
Yeah, a big time. Now, I know there's a lot of more motorcycle organizations that are kind of doing good for the community and whatnot. It might be to do away with that stigma of the big bad biker or whatever. But why human trafficking specifically for your group? What's that intrinsic motivator?
Well, like you said, there's other organizations that are doing awesome work, regarding child abuse and, the whole thing about the riding community is that, as the eyes and ears of our communities, we are in a unique position to converse with others of like mind. We can go where others do not or cannot go. We attend several events throughout southern Alberta and British Columbia, such as, classic car show and shines, motorcycle shows, charity events, toy runs, and many other events. And during these events, we're spreading the word about human trafficking in our community. And we're also on the lookout, scanning the crowds, hopefully hoping to spot traffickers and their victims. Wow. When we do. And yeah, so it's not just a joyride type of thing. But the thing is, we really do try to involve the riding community. And there's many, riders throughout Alberta and other provinces that we connect with as well. And I tell you, they're not big bad people. I always say to somebody, especially to my granddaughters, my oldest granddaughter rides with me all the time to a lot of these events. Her moniker is Shadow, me and my shadow. And so I've always told her that, when you're not around with me, whatever, and something is happening, and you see a biker, out on the street or some bikers out there, if there's no police around or whatever like that, go to them and they'll help you.
That's a really good point. No, absolutely. So getting back to what your goal is, human trafficking, how widespread is this globally?
Well, that's that's almost like an iceberg. You really don't know until you get further into it, how bad it is. And so, it truly is a real global problem. And it's much worse than most people know. It's actually, this is a frightening, and the magnitude of the problem is actually overwhelming. And the statistics, some of the statistics that I'll be presenting, are from, Stats Canada, certainly the RCMP in the U.S. National Center on Sexual Exploitation, even UNICEF and United Nations. And these stats are estimates at best, because human trafficking, it's an underground criminal activity. It's hidden from plain sight.
Yeah.
Therefore making it very difficult to get accurate numbers of what really happening and how many victims are involved. And we also get some of our data too, from other organizations of like mine, such as Not in My City and the Joy Smith Foundation, and that, but the illegal transport of individuals by force or deception, for human trafficking is totally a global problem that's affecting people of all ages. And according to United Nations and the U.S. National Center of Sexual Exploitation, they're saying online exploitation is on the rise exponentially around the globe. And much of this increase has been attributed to COVID, because during the pandemic, people, especially kids, were gravitating to social media to stay connected with the outside world. And
they were
and
online.
it is, that's right. And it's estimated that over 40 million people are trafficked every year globally. And you put this into perspective, that is more than the population of Canada.
I know. It's unreal. And, I think like the first thing that comes to most of our minds when we think of human trafficking is, of course, the sex trade. So, but, I understand that there are other angles to this, right? So can you maybe share a bit about some of the other kinds of human trafficking that take place?
Yeah, it's modern day slavery, but a large in some of the other countries, and I'll tell you, every continent in the world is affected by it, and some more so with forced labor than others, and but in the United States and Canada, I would say the large part of it, is 93 or 94% is actual for sexual exploitation.
Yeah, definitely. What's the average age of the victims of human trafficking? Are they mostly young, kind of the more vulnerable?
The average is about 45% are between the ages of 18 and 24, and about 25% are under 16, but that is between 12 and 14. But I'll tell you, there are children in Canada that are even at the age of 4 or 7 that is being trafficked. And I can tell you not from personal experience, but a really good friend of ours, of my youngest daughter, and she was trafficked at the age of 4. And her parents never knew anything about it, because, these guys are so skilled at what they do.
It's hard not to call them what they are, right?
Scum of the earth.
Right. Yeah, and Paul, and it's interesting that you mentioned Canada, because we do normally think of other countries like Thailand or Mexico, where it's kind of more common, more prevalent, more in your face. But it does happen in Canada, and even right here in southern Alberta, and it's so difficult to believe, isn't it?
Well, most people have no idea. They do think it happens in Mexico and Thailand and South Africa, and the thing is, it happens right here in our own backyards. And I mentioned earlier that about 93% are sexual exploitation, but did you know that 95% or so of the trafficking that happens in Canada, it's not all about immigrants coming over that are being brought in from some of these countries. 95% are Canadian citizens. They're born in Canada. And the thing is, Jeanette, it's right across our nation. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the cities or out in the countryside, and Alberta is one of 5 hotspots in Canada, especially southern Alberta. That blows my mind.
Wow.
And a lot of people I talk to, they just look at me. And when we did an event up in New Horizon Mall in February, and it was a motorcycle show, Move Your Soul, and we were one of 60 vendors that were there. It was kind of an impromptu thing, but it was a 3-day event. We had thousands and thousands of people coming through. I mean, we were so busy, it was amazing. And I'll tell you, I would say 75% of the people we spoke to had no idea. And even some of those, they looked at our tent, had, bikers against trafficking. They thought we were against, drug trafficking.
Sure, and that's, yeah, I can see somebody thinking that too. Yeah, completely. Now, you guys obviously do fundraising, and you raise awareness like you were doing there, and I know that you help other groups based out of Lethbridge, like Not for Sale, and I just recently had the privilege of speaking with them about their new safe shelter in Mexico, and they're planning to build some in Canada as well. So is your organization getting involved in a more direct way to protect victims or potential victims locally?
Yeah, I really can't comment too much on that, but we do, work, closely with Not for Sale. We know the leaders of the organization and the founders very, very closely. We know them very well, and personal friends of ours, and we'll be there to help and assist.
Yeah.
And we have done that in the past,
Okay.
and where there was, someone who was trying to get out, a 15-year-old girl was trying to get out of it. And she was able to escape, and she made contact with them. And so what we did was we provided security and surveillance at the meeting place. And that's about all I can tell you about that.
Yeah.
But, they do an awesome work, Not for Sale, as well as other organizations, such as Not in My City. I mean, Paul Brent, he brought that thing together, and he's responsible for this action coalition type of thing in Alberta, and then Joy Smith Foundation. Joy was the one who really was able to, from a high school teacher in Manitoba, was able to eventually get into the Manitoba legislature, then ended up becoming an MP in Ottawa. And she was the one who wrote the bills to have give more power, to the courts and to the authorities, right across Canada.
We're running out of time here, but really quickly, I wanted to kind of get back to like the more educational piece and practical. So what are these criminals looking for in vulnerable victims? Who are they targeting? How are they luring them? What can people do to prevent it from happening to them or somebody that they know?
Yeah, well, what they're looking for is, they're typically targeting, vulnerable populations. They're looking for individuals who may feel hopeless or are struggling with dependencies, and they often target people with financial instability, or those in poverty. They may have and these people may have any of the following. There's substance abuse or disorders, and homelessness. Living out in the streets, runaways because the kids weren't happy at home, probably for some really good reasons. Unstable housing, language barriers, mental health disorders, criminal records, social misfits.
Okay.
So, the traffickers, they prey on a person's desperation and promising them independence or a way out. And their recruitment begins early and may involve several different members of the trafficking team.
Oh, that's just terrible. So if a viewer knows of someone who might be a victim or who this might be happening to, what is like the right way to respond? Because these are really dangerous people that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's you're right. The thing is, a lot of these traffickers, they're in their mid-20s, and it's not just men. It's also women who were trafficked at a younger age, that they became so reliant and dependent on these traffickers that they're actually doing this work for them. But if you're out in public, and especially if you see, I don't know if anybody has seen the signal like this, and we should be teaching our kids and schools and that about that hand signal. If anybody spots that in an airport or in a mall or something like that, or walking down the streets, I would say take a picture with everybody's got smartphones, so take a picture of the youngster and the person that they're with, and if they're walking to the car, get a license plate number, phone 911, and report it right away. If there's any suspicion, we can contact organizations such as, there's hotlines too, that they are out there. And certainly if you want to contact us, we have our email, Alberta at gmail.com. You can contact us and we'll look into it further, and see what can be done.
Yeah, that's good that you said that, because I was going to ask if people want to learn more about your organization too. What can they do? Do you guys have a website or a Facebook page or something?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page that we have, which is Bikers Against Trafficking, all one word, .ca. Our .org actually is our headquarters down in Florida, and normally they have a connection there for the Canadian side, but they're going through a revamp right now, redesigning it, so it's not hooked up right now. But yeah, certainly you can reach us that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's some practical advice there. Thank you so much for being with us today, Paul, and for sharing more about this horrible thing that goes on, and for the work that you do as well. Thank you for that.
Well, we're just a small cog, I always compare it to some of our guys, our people, is that we're just a drop in an ocean, because it's very difficult. And all we can do is bring awareness. And I mean, you mentioned at the beginning about that movie, The Sound of Freedom. And we stood outside here in Lethbridge at the movie mill. A bunch of us had stood outside after some of the ones, the different shows at different times, handing out our brochures and to people as they were coming out, and not one person rejected it. In fact, when I left the building and I went out to my bike, I had about 7 or 8 people standing around my bike waiting for me to talk to me afterwards, And so, I mean, it was a good movie. I think it was timely, and it just falls in line with what other organizations are doing. But to have someone, like Jim, to produce that, that film based on Tim Ballard's story. I mean, it wasn't in so much filmed about in the United States. It was in other countries. But the thing is bringing awareness. Anything we can do to bring awareness. That's how we combat this thing.
Absolutely, 100%. Paul, thanks so much for being here today.
Hope I could help.
Absolutely. Paul Lavelle is the acting president for the Bikers Against Trafficking Alberta chapter. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.